O filme que vamos ver hoje tem como título original L'Empire de la Perfection. O título internacional chama a atenção para o personagem principal, chamemos-lhe assim. O filme é um documentário, mas tem um personagem principal que é o tenista John McEnroe. John McEnroe in the Realm of Perfection. Temos connosco o realizador Julien Faraut. Maybe it's better to speak English than French. Well, maybe, okay. Thanks a lot, Julien, for being here with us. We will have a Q&A at the end of the screening, but Julien will say a few things at the beginning.
Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. For the general public as well as for the industry, fiction is still the more obvious proposition of cinema.
No, not but there is fiction in a documentary, and there is documentary in fiction as well. No. The audience is the same.
So we found a step below documentaries. It's still a step below, for the general public. And inside this, the documentary world, we found many steps. You can find at the top of the list, like ethnological documentaries without music or narrator. The documentary that deals with politics or social issues, they are the most respected. But you also find like wildlife, animals documentary. You find stock footages documentary. And of course, less respected subject, lower subject, like sport. And that's the first bad news for you guys tonight. You're gonna watch a documentary made of stock footages about sport. But if we keep coming down through this cinematic later rates, you'll find also scientific films. You'll find like instructional films, and this is maybe the lowest level of cinema, instructional films. And that's the second bad news for you tonight. You're gonna watch a documentary made of stock footage about sports made from instructional films. And nobody cares about instructional films. There's very few in literature, historian of cinema or critics. They don't care about instructional films. That's why I was very interested in it. So I guess you're ready now, because nobody's leaving the room, so it's a good point. You're ready now to know more about high-level sport. It's a wild world. It's mean and tough. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome in the realm of perfection.
Thank you. We'll meet at the end. Thank you, Julien Faraut, for this incredible film. So this is a film with many layers. So it's a film about a great character, because John McEnroe he was a great player, but he was also a great character. But it's kind of when you did this film about this particular game, so he was someone that was at the top constantly. We referred that he won almost of the games. He was a winner, but then here, so he had everything, and then suddenly, because of one match and one moment or some in the match, he lost everything, and that changed his life completely. At the same time, so it's a film, as we referred to, about sports, It's a film about cinema as well. You work with the archives. How did you come up to do this film? You work with the sports archive, don't you?
True. I work for the French Sports Institute, which is a public institution, and I'm in charge of a film collection. And all my films take their source from the materials preserved in this collection. What is very unique in this film is how it starts. Most of the time, when you make a film, there is a wish, a desire, and then you look forward to find materials, stock footage to do your film. Most of the time, the directors have this habit to push the materials to tell what they want to tell. In my case, it's the opposite. I work for the archives. I discover a very unusual materials, which are rushes. When we used to shoot films, on photochemical areas, we have to send the materials to the labs for processing. And most of the time, the labs destroy the rushes because it's too huge. For instance, the film that Gilles de Kermadec edited to portray John McEnroe lasts 30 minutes, and I found 20 hours of rushes. So it's a huge amount of cans, and it's not usual to still preserve this kind of materials. So for me, it was a real discovery, and I was very impressed by what I discovered, because the rushes tell so much about the process of the set. It's like we have in the rushes the making of the film, because you have all what happens before and after, what we commonly keep for the edition. And it was also conveyed for me a big sense of ambiguity, because back in the times, in the 80s, you probably know that it's the switch between cinema and video, and all the TV broadcasting, of course, was shot in video during the 80s. So you're not supposed to watch a tennis game in 60 millimeters. And because the 60 millimeters is very grainy and it has this very cinematic type, I really didn't, I don't know what I was watching. Is it a real game? Is it a movie about a game? So the first subject that comes from this rushes, this discovery, was the topic of sports and cinema. And because the rushes give me this opportunity to talk about how it's different to put a camera for a cinema crew, very different from the TV broadcasting type. All these subjects just come to me naturally, and I just grab it and I work for the archives.
But in this case, you were lucky because Kermadec, you worked with several cameras. In this final, at the end of this match, you show, for instance, McEnroe seen by 3 or 4 different cameras, and so when so he does the service and what happens next from different points of view. Did you, when you had all this material, did you write a script, or you made the script kind of together with the editing?
There is no script in a typical way. It was a long task, very hard task, and long journey to.
How long did it take for you to make this film?
3 years, because 20 hours of 60 minutes with, of course, the sound were apart, so I have to synchronize the sound and the images. It was, I wrote, so to speak, the film while I was, I don't know how you say in English, dérochage, le dérochage. When you just you check your rushes. If it's good. So I have to put paste like the ancient work when you work on with analog materials. You have to paste and very small part of chemical. Real, so it's very long, and this work also helps you to think about what you're doing, and it's very also it's a gesture. It's very physical. I mean, it's like to sue. You know, you are very focused on what you're doing, and so. Basically, from the start, I tried to digitize very quickly some of the best part of the rushes and start to edit. And then the process was always like testing the edition, and the film grows. I work with I mix like small group. By team. The first team was like the best points. Another one was like arguments or tantrums towards against the referees, and another group like tantrums against the film crew or the photographers. So there were different teams, and I tried to edit and to find, as you see in the film, it's sometimes a bit chaotic, because in the first hour you just follow the path. I follow myself, and I want to tell you this unusual journey into the rushes. And finally, I really feel the need to tell the story of a game, because I really think it will have missed. Because when you think about tennis and cinema, of course, the typical the rules of the tennis game creates something very fictional. Very, as Daniel said, the players has to create the time they need to win. So I really felt this need to not to speak about cinema, but to end the film with cinema itself, and to work on the emotion of the drama.
Mm-hmm. And the text of the narrator, how did you, how and when did you write it, and why have you chosen Mathieu Amalric?
Well, I write the voice myself. It helps me to build the whole film. And the choice of Mathieu Amalric was first was the proposition of my producer, Julien, who works with Paolo at Gemini.
Mm-hmm.
And because Julien worked on the first feature film of McEnroe. He just tell me
The Save or Wimbledon.
that's it, which is not about tennis.
Yes.
But, and I really like this idea because I really love the work of McEnroe. But the two main reasons why I was pleased by this idea. The first one is I was convinced and sure that you know how to carry on a voice in an unusual way and not in the typical stock footage film, like the broadcasting type, with this long monologue and very impersonal and boring voiceover.
But he speaks to the spectator.
Yeah, I know that, and we keep his breathing, and yeah, I was convinced that he was the good actor to do like this. But the second reason is more important for the project. As you saw, I made few references of Jean Godard or Serge Danet. I spoke about cinema and the presence of McEnroe because he doesn't speak with his name, but of course his voice is very unique, and you can easily recognize him. So his presence give another cinema dimension because he embodies the contemporary French cinema. So it helps to the idea of the project.
And before passing to the audience, there's this the reference to Godard, and so the film starts and ends with the Godard say cinema lies, sport doesn't. There is also there's Serge Danet, and behind a strong presence of Chris Marker. So the work with the archive, even the voice of the narrator is kind of an avatar, something Chris Marker also worked with.
I'm glad you noticed this, because you're maybe the first person who told me about Chris Marker in my film.
No.
Of course, Chris Marker represents something very important for me because I was already a cinephile and I really love cinema, but the first time I really want to make movies, it was just after a screening of Sunless. And I don't know, it was like people sometimes they have a vision, like a vision of God. I never have such a vision, but Sunless was not my destiny, but I really feel the need and the passion to make a movie myself. So of course, I feel maybe I walk in his path. He opened many horizons for directors. So I really want to go through the world he creates, and of course he used to work with stock footages, and I really liked the way he invites everybody to do so. And first, before he was a filmmaker, he worked in the publisher company, and he did the same with text of the others. And he said in the introduction of one of his books called L'homme et sa liberté, He said, I really love to work with texts written by others because I feel a great freedom to choose whatever I want from them. And there is maybe one very obvious clin d'œil to Chris Marker in the film is the Lettres de Sibérie type A, B. You saw the 2 times the same sequence, but with 2 narrating voice different, like A and B.
Then we can open to the audience. First question. Yeah.
Hello, congratulations. I'm a sports journalist from Brazil, and I'm really curious about the final game of the movie. Why did you choose this game? Because it's a movie about talks about a lot about Joe McEnroe. He won a lot of tournaments, and you choose a game, and he was defeated. And why did you choose this game? It sounds for me like maybe a kind of revenge, because so many complaints, because he complains all the time, and in the end he loses the game.
There is more than one answer to your question. You're right, I choose a defeat, but this defeat, this end, this non-happy ending for McEnroe is altered. I put the rates, the last frame of the film is not this defeat, but this amazing rate of wins during a season. So this is really the end of the film. So for me it was the best way to show you the cost of perfection. It costs a lot, and it's very difficult to reach this unreachable 100% of wins in one season. Nowadays, like the best player, they can't beat this rate, the McEnroe's rate. It's 96%, more than 96% of wins during the same season. So the film doesn't stop with a real defeat, but it's to show you how complex, how tough is it to be a top tennis player. He only lost one game during the 94 French tournament. He played during the 2 sets. He reached such high level of playing. He dominates so outrageously his opponent. So the drama of this final is quite unbelievable. Nobody think in this final that he could lose it. It wasn't. You can't write it in a script, this kind of switch. So this final is also known as a very important a turning point in tennis history. It's the end of the modern tennis, and it's the beginning of the contemporary tennis, because the 2 players belongs to 2 different worlds. McEnroe was like a more kind of a romantic tennis player, because he was just focused on the play, and he was convinced about of his talent. He was gifted, so he didn't work and train a lot. I don't know if you noticed, but during the game, the final, you can see 5 or 6 bottles of Pepsi Cola just by the chair of McEnroe. Ivan Lendl was one of the first players who knows about nutrition. He trained a lot, he do physical exercise. He was more like a machine type, contemporary type, so he has to win. And so this game is known as a very important turning point in tennis history.
Would you consider John McEnroe type of a sportsman as Maradona, George Best? So those people, they were very talented, but in the end, that was something tragic about them. They have reached the top, and then suddenly something happened that. Do you consider him of that family?
Yeah, for sure. He belongs to the Hall of Fame of the best sportsmen in history. But he has something very different. I think he created something new, and it never happened before. And I think it will never happen in the future. You know how to manage with these tantrums, with these bad feelings, these feelings of injustice, of frustration. As Danny said, he looks like a child, which is tortured by the feeling of injustice. And in the 80s, the sportsmen start to work with psychologists for what we call the mental preparation. And they used to work this way in their first meeting. That they work with the sportsmen and said, we have 2 columns, what you can carry on and what you don't have to focus on. So you can work on your technique, on your motivation, on your health, but you cannot focus on everything that you cannot do nothing, like the weather, the audience, the referees, your opponent. So don't waste your time, your energy, and stay focused. And McEnroe is always in the second column. He can't bear to, he wants to control everything. And that's the main point. He's a perfectionist. So I know the term is sounds like ordinary term, but it could be a pathology. And in this case, the problem with perfectionism is we live in the world that surrounds us is by definition unpredictable, imperfect. So he put himself in a restless feeling of frustration because he always wants to reach perfection, and he has this habit to, he wants the best for himself, but he wants everybody who are around him, like the referees, but also the audience. He wants the same wish to be the best. And it creates something very strange because you know how to manage it. So it's not bearable. Most of the time when the players just leave their feelings, their bad feelings, come outside them, they just they can't play anymore in the game. And McEnroe know how to handle and to carry on with this bad feelings most of the time. So most of the audience, they think of him like a comedian, like a character, you say. And I really want to know more about the player beneath this character. And the difference between the way he's understanding and the way he is. I think we don't have to. We have to take McEnroe in a more literal way. He's not a comedian because the feelings themselves, you can't create it. You can't provoke the feelings. You know how to do it, to do with it. You can win the next point because he creates power. The hunger creates. You know how to create power from it. But the feelings that start the whole process, I really don't think he can provoke it. It's this psychic. His brain, his body is reacting truly. I think he's very sincere, and I invite you to watch the commercials or the movie he did, where he has to play McEnroe himself, like when he has to be hungry or to play his tantrum, and you will see how bad is acting, very bad acting.
More questions?
Okay. Good evening. I want to congratulate you for the movie. McEnroe was my first favorite player. I still prefer tennis today because of him. And you mentioned something about Lendl was like the first contemporary player in terms of the scientific treatment of the athlete. But in a way, McEnroe was also the first contemporary player because of his insanity. Tennis is known for a gentleman game, and he broke that stereotype of character. We saw like Jimmy Connors, he was the perfect gentleman. McEnroe was nothing like that. So we can say that this documentary is also a biopic, but not a fictional biopic, a documental biopic, because his insanity, and he was a bit insane, was also a contribution for his perfection, or almost perfection, because in that sense he was the first contemporary player as a character, because like McEnroe, I can only think of Marat Safin 15 years later. No, I mentioned in the bad temper. There was Safin, which was a player that McEnroe himself loved. And he was also really wild in the court. So we can also say that this documentary is also a biopic of an exceptional, eccentric athlete.
Yeah, it's maybe more a portrait.
Yes,
yeah. A portrait than a biopic, because I don't speak about his whole life. Of course, but it is not. This is not proper to uniquely belongs to tennis. The insanity you mentioned. I think it's really the case for most of the top athletes, or the high-level athletes. But you don't mention other players, but their insanity today are more hidden. And of course the rules, because many rules start just after McEnroe, and because of McEnroe. Many rules, like hundreds of rules. So the players don't have the same freedom to act, to speak, and to interrupt the game. What we missed about him, I think, the most is not really his character or his bad behavior, but his creativity. And I really rediscover it when I work on the rushes. And I still feel like this is insane how you never know what he's doing.
He was clever.
Very clever, very mental, and he's always waiting for the last instance, seconds, to know the best shot to do at this particular time, with no habits and no receipt. It's always a new answer to a new problem. And this Serge Danet, I didn't know why, but in the French version we missed to record this quote. It's in the English version, but I really love it. Danet said, Bjorn Borg puts the ball where the player is no more. But McEnroe puts the ball where it will never be. And it was so clever because Daniel really understand this very unique player. And maybe that's why also the referees were so weak and so... Because I think McEnroe was very hard for referees, because we don't know what he's going to do, what's going to do.
One more question. Then just before finish.
There's a tension all over the film that's quite the same tension as if you're playing tennis in the court. I played tennis, and so I felt that was it you wanted to do that, to create that tension, same tension of a match?
Well, once again, it was in rushes. I didn't really create. My edition just don't erase it. It just maybe emphasized, but it was really in the rushes because McEnroe creates this tension in the court, and maybe the work also on the music helps to emphasize the tension. And I really want to work with rock music, and especially with electric guitar, because we have in electric guitar this high tension, and it's called the overdrive or saturation. And I really think that it was full. You know that in our body, between our brains and the muscles, the message is an electric message. And in the case of John McEnroe, I really think that he was like high voltage, high tension. So I really want the music to be in that way, very electric. And you feel, of course, this tension.
Well, thank you everybody. Thank you, Julien.